Welcome to the Am I Mental podcast, where we explore the intersections between mental health, medicine, and the law. Today's episode is part of our Doctors in Court edition, where we will be diving into a complex medical negligence case involving a patient and a medical advisor. This case focuses on questions around medical responsibility, insurance assessments, and communication errors. My name is Dr. Sabine Fonderson, and in this podcast, we'll break down the timeline of events, explain both the plaintiff's and the defense's arguments, we'll review the disciplinary board's decision, and clarify key medical terms. Stick around until the end for two thought-provoking questions, and I'll share my reflections on those as well. Let's jump right in. First, let's go through the timeline of events that led to this case. November the 5th, 2015, our patient, we'll call him Jack, was involved in a car accident. He sustained what appeared to be minor injuries to his neck and back, commonly known as soft tissue injuries. At the time, there were no indications of fractures or serious damage, and the injuries were expected to heal over time. 6 months later, on May 17, 2016, after the accident, Dr. Mark, so the medical advisor for Jack's insurance company, reviewed Jack's case and concluded that the injuries were typical soft tissue strains. Dr. Mark reported that these types of injuries generally heal within a few months, and there were no signs of long-term damage to bones, muscles, or ligaments. His assessment was that Jack's recovery should be straightforward. September 17, 2017, Jack's personal medical advisor released a different report stating that Jack had developed Whiplash-Associated Disorder, WAD. This condition is harder to diagnose because it doesn't always show up on imaging scans, but Jack's advisor believed that the car accident had caused significant and lasting damage resulting in chronic pain. March 14, 2019, as part of the ongoing medical review, Dr. Mark sent a series of additional questions to a neurologist who was conducting an independent medical evaluation of Jack. However, Dr. Mark did not immediately inform Jack's medical advisor about these questions, which led to one of the complaints in the case. This delay in communication became a central issue in the legal proceedings. Now that we understand the timeline, let's take a closer look at the specific accusations Jack brought forward against Dr. Mark. Jack, through his legal representative, made two major claims against Dr. Mark. Number one, negligence in medical assessment. Jack argued that Dr. Mark's initial report underestimated the severity of his injuries. According to Jack, Dr. Mark did not properly acknowledge the possibility of Whiplash-Associated Disorder, WAD, which Jack's personal doctor later diagnosed. Jack believed that the car accident had caused significant long-term effects that Dr. Mark failed to recognize in his assessment. Whiplash injuries, particularly WAD, can be difficult to diagnose as they often don't show visible signs on imaging tests. However, Jack and his medical advisor argued that his ongoing pain and limited mobility were directly linked to the accident and that Dr. Mark was negligent in dismissing the possibility of WAD. Claim number two, failure to communicate. The second complaint focused on Dr. Mark's communication or lack thereof. During the medical review process, when Dr. Mark sent follow-up questions to the neurologist in March of 2019, he did not immediately inform Jack's medical advisor about the additional questions, and Jack claimed that this delay breached professional conduct and resulted in an unfair advantage for the insurance company's side as they had access to information before Jack's team. Jack's case was built on the argument that Dr. Mark's negligence in both assessment and communication had a negative impact on his ability to receive fair treatment and compensation for his injuries. So, in response, Dr. Mark presented his defense against the accusations. Number one, defending the medical assessment. Dr. Mark stood by his initial evaluation from May 2016. He argued that his conclusions were based on the clinical evidence available at the time, including the absence of any structural damage to Jack's bones or muscles. He acknowledged that Jack's recovery might take longer than expected, but he emphasized that this was within the normal range for soft tissue injuries. Regarding the diagnosis of Whiplash-Associated Disorder, or WAD, Dr. Mark pointed out that the condition is notoriously difficult to verify without physical evidence such as imaging or clear medical markers. While Jack's advisor later diagnosed WAD, Dr. Mark maintained that his assessment in 2016 was reasonable based on the information he had at the time. Accusation number 2. Explaining the communication delay. As for the issue with communication, Dr. Mark admitted that he did not notify Jack's medical advisor right away when he submitted questions to the neurologist in 2019. However, he explained that this was an oversight, not an intentional breach of protocol. Dr. Mark noted that once the issue was brought to his attention, he corrected the mistake and Jack's advisor were given the opportunity to submit their own questions before the final neurologist report was completed. Dr. Mark argued that this administrative error did not have any real impact on the fairness of the process, as both sides were ultimately able to provide input before the neurologist finalized their findings. The disciplinary board carefully considered both the accusation and Dr. Mark's defense, and here's how they evaluated the case. Number 1, assessment of medical advice. The board examined Dr. Mark's 2016 report to determine whether it met the professional standards expected of a medical advisor. They found that Dr. Mark had based his conclusions on the evidence available at the time, including medical records and diagnostic imaging. While they acknowledged that Whiplash-Associated Disorder can be a valid diagnosis, they agreed that Dr. Mark's skepticism toward the condition was reasonable given the lack of objective medical findings. The board concluded that Dr. Mark's assessment in 2016 did not amount to negligence. His report was consistent with the typical recovery timeline for soft tissue injuries, and there was no evidence that he had ignored any critical information. Number 2, handling of communication issues. The board also addressed the delay in communication when Dr. Mark sent questions to the neurologist. They agreed that this was a procedural mistake, but they did not view it as a serious breach of professional conduct. Dr. Mark had taken responsibility for the error and made efforts to correct it by notifying Jack's advisor before the neurologist's final report was completed. The board ruled that while the communication delay could have been avoided, it did not compromise the integrity of the medical review process, and both sides were ultimately given the opportunity to provide input, and the neurologist's findings were based on a fair and balanced review of the case. The disciplinary board found that both of Jack's complaints were unfounded. They ruled that Dr. Mark had acted within the bounds of his professional responsibility and that no disciplinary action was necessary. Let's take a moment to clarify some of the medical terms and concepts that were central to this case. Whiplash-Associated Disorder, WAD. WAD refers to a range of symptoms, including neck pain, headaches, and dizziness, that can occur after a sudden impact or injury to the neck, typically from a car accident. It's a controversial diagnosis because it often doesn't show up on imaging tests, making it harder to prove in legal cases. Soft tissue injuries. These are injuries to muscles, ligaments, and tendons rather than bones. Examples include strains, sprains, and bruising. Now, while soft tissue injuries generally heal over time, they can sometimes lead to long-term pain, especially in cases like Jack's, where the recovery process was prolonged. And the medical advisor. In legal cases involving insurance claims or personal injury, a medical advisor provides expert opinions on the patient's condition. In this case, Dr. Mark was acting as the medical advisor for the insurance company, assessing the severity of Jack's injuries and their potential long-term effects. Understanding these terms helps shed light on why both sides in this case had such different perspectives on the patient's condition and the doctor's evaluation. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with 2 questions to consider. How should medical professionals balance clinical evidence with with subjective patient reports of pain, especially in cases like WAD, where there's no clear physical evidence? Well, I think that doctors must strike a balance between objective medical findings and the patient's experience. In cases where there's no visible injury, it's important to listen to the patient's concern while also relying on medical guidelines and further tests if needed. A thorough assessment combined with empathy and clear communication can help bridge the gap between clinical skepticism and patient-reported symptoms. Here's a second question. How can medical professionals ensure transparency and fairness when handling legal and medical evaluations, especially when communication errors occur? Well, transparency and timely communication are crucial. Even minor administrative oversights, like in this case, can create tension or misunderstandings. Medical professionals should follow established protocols, notify all parties of any updates or questions, and correct mistakes as soon as they are identified to maintain trust and fairness throughout the process. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into medical responsibility and professional ethics. If you found this episode insightful, don't forget to share it with others and subscribe for more thought-provoking discussions on healthcare and the law. Until next time, take care.